Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Love Ignites Peace Book Club podcast. We have a very special book to discuss tonight, and we have the author with us. Tonight, we are discussing Heaven is Beautiful by Peter Panagore, and Peter is with us tonight to answer even more questions about the book and his experience. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, and I'm so glad you said yes to this invitation.
I couldn't refuse. It was beautiful.
You're our first author to have on our book club podcast because we also really haven't invited any, but we wanted to have you on here because we really enjoyed your book, and we also really loved chatting with you on season 2, episode 21, Dying Was Hard, but Death is Beautiful, which was the podcast that we recorded with you individually. And we're now able to have some follow-up to that and hear from a few more people in their questions, our wonderful book club group. So anyways, thank you again for saying yes.
Let's talk about some near-death experience statistics. For those of you that don't know, there is actually an international association for near-death studies. And I know that there are more organizations out there that study near-death experiences, but this is a really big organization.
Peter has experienced 2 near-death experiences, which is what his book is based on. His first book is based off of his first near-death experience, and all that came from that, questions that he answered around heaven, hell, sin, God,
love,
afterlife, love. Yeah. So that's why we're going into near-death experiences here.
So the earliest, just a few kind of interesting statistics. The earliest known description of near-death experience was recounted by Plato in Myth of and this is found in Book X of the Republic. So that was written in 420 BC. So we know that near-death experiences have been happening and being documented for really eons. And I really wish I had some statistics, and I couldn't find any quickly on the number of near-death experiences that are believed to happen every year, but it is a pretty high number from what I have read. So this is interesting, and I'm going to ask Peter about this in a little bit. But there are 15 common characteristics of a near-death experience that have been reported by near-death experience people. And this International Association for Near-Death Studies studies these people and these experiences. They are 100% dedicated to that. So what they have found is that these 15 common characteristics are not experienced like all at one time. What they've discovered is that usually a person has 2 of these 15 experiences when they have a near death. So those experiences would include a sense of being outside one's physical body, sometimes perceiving it from an outside position, a sense of movement through darkness or a tunnel, intense emotions, heightened perceptions, experiencing a great light or darkness, perceiving a spiritual realm, which may include vividly memorable landscapes, encounters with deceased loved ones, spiritual beings, and or religious figures, knowledge of the nature of the universe, a life review, a sense of oneness and interconnectedness, a border of no return, a sense of knowing the future, and messages regarding one's life purpose. So I'm not going to ask Peter this now, but at some point we're going to hear from Peter on, of those 15 characteristics, what did his near-death experience include? So let's start with a quick summary of the book.
When Peter Panagore died on the side of a mountain, his life was forever changed. In March of 1980, college senior Peter Panagore went ice climbing on the world-famous Lower Weeping Wall along the Ice Fields Parkway in Alberta, Canada. His climbing partner was an experienced ice climber, but Panagore was a novice. On their descent, they became trapped on the side of the mountain. As the sun set, he was overcome by exhaustion and hypothermia began to set in. He died on the side of that mountain, and in those minutes on the other side, he experienced hell, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Heaven was beautiful. Peter's death experience changed his life and resulted in an intense spiritual journey that has continued for decades. It compelled him to pursue a master's degree at Yale Divinity School, focusing on systematic theology and Christian mysticism. His educational background, coupled with 30 years of meditative practice and 20 years of professional work with the dying and grieving, has given him unique insight, language, and perspective on heaven, God, death, life, love, beauty, and hope.
So, book club members, what did you think of Peter's book?
Well, Peter, first of all, thank you so much for going so deep and pulling out so much private feelings and memories and sharing it really with the world. Thank you.
I'll go next. Peter, I loved your book. I talked about it the last podcast we were recording. I'm like, wait till you get to this part of the book. And I just really loved it. I felt as I was reading it, I almost felt like I was alongside you. You just brought it really to life for me. I was not expecting to be so overcome. So thank you so much for sharing it with the world. I can only speak for me, but thank you so much for sharing it with me. I feel like it changed my life.
Well, thanks for saying that, Noelle. The scariest part about writing that book wasn't just sharing it with the world and knowing that there was all this risk involved in that for me personally, and but also the risk of writing it, just to try to, because I was an English major undergrad, I held a high standard for myself to be able to see if I could do what I hoped I could. I aspired to. And so thanks for saying so, because the writing of it, the engaging aspect of my emotional state with the reader that was the most painful thing I've ever done as a writer, because I had to relive the whole thing. So thanks.
Noelle, at some point, if you're willing to share, if you're not, that's okay. But if you're willing to share, I'd love to know how you feel it changed you.
Would you like me to share that now?
Sure.
I can. Okay. Well, for me, it's, the build up to the point that you actually left your body and had your near-death experience, which I wish we could coin that differently, because it doesn't encapsulate. But when you were there and you were feeling the vastness, I was feeling the vastness with you. I mean, I was reading it on my bed, but I was just feeling this vast, like in the womb, almost the womb space of like something larger coming through. And I used to have this dream when I was younger about this vastness. So for me, it felt like something I had experienced before, but the way you were able to explain it with the limited English language, it was just so beautiful. And I just felt like I was in this vastness. And now that I've experienced that kind of feeling, I can go back there. Like in a moment's notice. I'm a teacher and I work with little kids, but in a moment, even when it feels overwhelming, I can feel like I fill up that space. And I think it's because I've experienced it through your book. I know what that, as much as you can explain that, what that might feel like. So it was beautiful.
It sounds like you have it inside yourself already, which is why you could recognize it. You had this vastness experience. And when you were talking, I wrote down the word home, when you were talking about the womb. And I think that in our spiritual lives, when we have these moments of mystical gift, that those become windows for us back into our own selves, so that there's a little opening that happens, and then that opening remains, and we can enter back in and touch that place. And the more we touch that place, the more powerful it becomes inside us. Thank you, Noelle.
You mentioning the word home, I think, was actually really key in kind of bringing it all together for me. Because I was telling Ashlyn earlier that this book kind of took me for a journey, because I am afraid of heights. So I was very anxious reading about you climbing this ice thing. I'm not kidding when I say I was getting really anxious. And of course, I knew to an extent where the story goes. I'm like, this man's gonna die, but I know he comes back. But I was like, my heart was seriously beating out of my chest. And then you're going up, and then the rope's getting stuck, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then when you think, then you have that experience, you have this near-death experience, and then after, you went through so much beyond that, just on that trip within the 24 hours of the car accident and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reading a thriller, and I'm anxious. But then and also it threw me for a little bit of a loop because I've read a couple of near-death experiences, and when you described what you coined as like the hell experience of you having to relive all of the pain that you caused everyone, when I read that kind of made me pause for a second, and I thought that one moment felt really scary. But then by the time you brought it back and the depth and gravity and love and incredibleness that you experienced of going home, like you said, it was just so incredible, where it's like, okay, no matter any of the tribulations that you experience in this lifetime, or even the tribulations that you might experience as you pass over, so to speak, the end experience of just this all-encompassing, all things good place, state that is beyond our capacity to acknowledge or even give words to is just so incredible that all of those things are just almost like nothing. It's just a blip on the radar. I think you went into more detail on that on the last podcast, and it was just really beautiful to think of, like, to try to just go as far as your human mind can bring rationality to it, but it's like, think of the best possible feeling you could possibly think of, and then this is even better. Like, you haven't even tasted a little bit of it, which I know Noelle kind of talked about having had that experience, but I think even like meditation or prayer, being in those moments, and then you're able to convey to us, no, this is even better than that. Way, way better, beyond possible comprehension, which is really cool, and I think really special that you're able to share that with all of us.
Well, thanks, Jenna. I came back with a tablespoon of an ocean of what happened to me over there. And this tablespoon that came back with me, I've been swimming in that since then, in order to immerse myself as much as I can, because there are things that I didn't put in the book that I've talked about in podcasts, partly because I wasn't ready to talk about them, and partly because near-death experience for me, and I do think it's misnamed, but God bless Dr. Moody for all the work he's done, because there was nothing near about it in my experience. It was totally right there. But the swimming in the ocean of it gives me access to more of my own near-death experience. And so the more and this relates to what I was saying to Noelle, is as I go back into this place and I keep getting fed, I keep learning more about myself. And I know that I made a choice when I came back to fulfill my life contract that I had long before I was born. And the deal that I had was I worked for the divine, and the job I accepted when I came back, which I subsequently was upset that I took the job, was to be a communicator of it. And so my whole trajectory of my life before and after has been to try to not only communicate it in language, but find a way to weave in the energy itself into the language, so that a person might be touched by it. And if they're touched by it, then they know it inside themselves, then they can seek it from where they are. And so the whole drama of it, and it was crazy. It's just so many things happened. All those things that happened to me afterwards, within the first 24 hours, that changed me too. And all together, it was this one big, huge reset, born again, born from above, now an entirely different person. There's lots of language for this. I walked into a new life. I've spent my entire life trying to figure out how to be in this space and try to communicate it in some small way so that people can understand that what Plato talked about in Plato's Republic, and all over the world through the literature, that there have been people like us, and that there are other kinds of mystical experiences that people commonly have that aren't talked about in public, such as an after-death communication or visitation from an angel, which you might bring up at a small group like this, but you probably wouldn't bring up at the PTA because you wouldn't want to be tagged and labeled. But these experiences are common.
And I feel like you also had it in, compared to some of the other stories I've read, you had the experience, I guess, not in a common place. Not everyone finds himself hiking up or climbing a 450-foot ice cliff, but you were participating in a hobby that you loved while this happened, which I found really interesting. And I also found really interesting because, like I said, I'm afraid of heights. So even reading this, I was like, holy crap, this is making me really scared. But then you kind of strip it back, and I was even thinking, I'm like, okay, but why am I scared of heights? Because I'm afraid to die. And then like, wow, this kind of really takes that a little bit.
One of the things that climbing does, and I'm not a climber anymore, but one of the things that climbing does is it teaches mental focus. Because if your mind starts to wander, if your fear gets on top of you, then you might die. And so the pressure of the potential fall is the same pressure that keeps the mind focused. And so I don't know if you've ever been on a ropes course somewhere, but in a safe situation, if you ever have the opportunity to do a safe ropes course, just a rappel or some, monkey see, monkey do, they have them in the malls and places, you might find that you're able to bring your mind to exactly where you are in this space and trust the setup that you have. And it might change your perspective. It helped my meditative life. I was a meditator before this ever happened. And there's a real similarity to the power of mental focus in a singular place. I'm sure there are places in your life where you do that, where you get into the mental focus place. Same space on climb. It's the same space as in climbing.
I hadn't really thought about it, but you did a lot of high risk activities as a young man, it sounds like, from reading this book. I mean, have you just been flirting off and on with death your entire life, Peter?
Yeah, I think so. Even afterwards, it's like, so I have not been an ice climber, but I've continued. I've had an adventurous life, and I've developed my skills in different athletic genres to levels where I can get up to the edge of things, and I like that edge. Right now, I bought an electric fat tire bike, and I live on the most dangerous road where we live, and I live on the end of it. I live in a rural place on the coast of Maine, at the end of a peninsula, at the end of a neck, almost at the point, and we don't have any shoulders, and everybody drives fast. So I bought a fat tire bike so that I could safely ride this road and continue my outdoor adventures. I'm always balancing safety with risk, and I try to always lean into the safety side. That if I learned anything on that ice climb, I learned that. But yeah, so I still do those things.
So my question then would be, you've had 2 near-death experiences. You know what's on the other side. I know you have mentioned in the podcast and the book a yearning to connect with that. Do you experience fear? I mean, because a lot of fear at the root of it, like Jenna was just saying, fear of heights. Well, why are you afraid of heights? Because you don't want to die.
Right.
Or
why are you afraid of almost anything?
Yeah, a lot of things tie back into this fear of death. So how do you feel?
I'm not afraid of death. I'm absolutely, from the day that I died, I kept, when I finally I told the woman I married, my wife, that I wasn't afraid of death, I proved that to my family in 2015 when I died again. And the day that I died, I was going to go do something by myself. I was going to go solo sailing. Somebody had given me a small sailboat, and I was going to go sailing by myself, which I often did, which is kind of a risky thing to do, but I've been sailing by myself forever, decades. And I couldn't go out into the water because there was a fog. And so I had this heart attack at a yoga class, cutting a long story short. But when I realized I was having this widowmaker heart attack, 6% survival rate, I was kind of gleeful. I was like, whoa, today's the day I get to go home. I had no idea. And then I decided that I better try to live, because I had I got my kids and my granddaughter and my wife, and I decided I would try to live instead of like just accepting it and going. But no, I'm not afraid. There are things that frighten me. So if I almost get hit by a car, like I'm on my bike and somebody nearly hits me and almost blows me over, I have an adrenaline rush. I have a physical response, but I'm not afraid of actually dying. One day I was out in this boat and I was sailing by myself, and I came around this island to what we call the outside, which is out into the Atlantic Ocean. So I got out into the Gulf of Maine in the Atlantic Ocean, and the wind was blowing like twice as hard than it was on the inside. And I had all this sail up, and suddenly I'm in these really rough seas, and there's water breaking over the boat, and I'm like trying to handle this thing, and I had this adrenaline rush, and I'm starting to, like, my anxiety's rising, and then I think to myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? I could die. Okay. And so I just kind of smoothed myself down. And so I have a physical reaction to it. I have physical, adrenaline rushes. But the life that I've lived as a result, in terms of my fear, when I was a church pastor, I worked fairly closely with our police department and was several times in endangered situations where I just wasn't afraid. And therefore I was the guy they wanted with them because I wasn't afraid. So, side effect.
That's incredibly liberating.
Oh, it's incredibly liberating. It's not that I'm not afraid of dying. It's like, I know where I'm going. That's really what it is. I know where I'm going. And if I have to go through a hell of my own making again, I don't care. I'll go through it again. Totally good with that. Maybe I won't go through that. Maybe I will go through that. I don't really care because it's this big. And the divine love is twice the size, 10 times the size of the universe. And so that gives me this superior sense of safety in my life. I have this constant sense of security. Even when everything's falling apart around me in my life, I still try to, stop it from falling apart. But because I have this anchor in my life, I can live a fun life. So I've been trying to have as much fun as I can. Why not?
I have so many questions, but I know there's one on the tip of your tongue.
So your first near-death experience, you're literally having a conversation with God, the angels, like, I really don't, I'm not ready to go. I want to go back for my family. My parents need me. And in the second near-death experience, you had the same kind of experience in the sense of you're like, well, my granddaughter needs me. My son needs me. I'm not ready to go. Do you think that everyone has a choice as they're standing at that door saying, hey, I'm ready to go. Yeah, take me, or sorry, I've got other things I need to do. Can't go right now.
Yeah, it's a rare thing. And this is anecdotal through conversations with other near-death experiencers. It's a rare thing to be able to have that choice. Most people I know who are my friends, they get dragged back one way or the other. Angel drags them back. God kicks them out. Jesus says, no way. Somebody on the other side gives them the paddles. Something happens and and most people are pretty upset that they came back, that they did not want to. And I shared that part of the experience. I chose to come back both times. The first time, I was really upset at my own choice. I was angry for a very long time. And I projected that, of course, I'm a human being. I projected that at God. It's your fault for not showing me the fine print. But of course, it was me all along. And when I finally accepted that, I became a much happier person. And in the second event, I knew about timelessness. I understand about timelessness. I understand that I'm not a human being. I understand that I am at this other higher original self. And it's not like it's in my head that I understand that. I experience this every day. It's not something I've thought my way into and read books about and decided this is that. That's not what I'm talking about. I live this thing all the time. And so in the second event, I already knew what timelessness was. I already had understood what dying was. And because I understood timelessness, and it's kind of the same reason I came back in the first place, the length of my life is a snap of a finger. It's one snap, two snaps. It's not that long till I'm out of here for good. And at least in this go round. And my my kids weren't ready for me to go. They were in late 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, and my granddaughter had just been born, and a bad thing had happened in their marriage. And my daughter, thank God, had left him, and but the kid was just born. It was a newborn baby, and who I was needed. And I don't know why I got the choice. I didn't I didn't I didn't so much ask permission the second time as I said, if it's all the same with you, I'm sticking around for a while. And I turned around and went back, as opposed to making a tussle with the divine. But I hadn't gone very far either. I was still very close to my body. I know that I'm living in a time limit, and because I know that I'm in a time limit, it makes a lot of things very bearable here, including having to live in this hellscape of suffering. Beautiful, beautiful hellscape. It's a great place to live, but also everybody knows suffering intimately, and that makes it kind of hard. But it ends. It ends, and you will discover for yourself. And I'm not here to convince you, because I don't need to, because you're going to find out for yourself, and it's not going to be that long. It's going to feel like it's a long time on this side, but on the other side, it's not. And you're going to find out for yourself. And the more a person aims to love here, the closer the love and light is inside you when you leave. And so it's a lot easier to find your way when you have a lamp in your hand and you're not waiting for somebody to show up with a flashlight, which they do. People get attended to all the time. I got attended to. The flashlight came down in the form of this angelic being.
I love what you just said, Peter. I think that's so beautiful, that the more that you love here, the more incredible your experience really is when you get to the other side.
Ties into a couple questions that I have from what you just said. One, I know you already shared a little bit in the difference between the first and the second near-death experience, but I'd love to hear more about the differences. Like, did you go through that purgatory type hell again? Was it quicker? Was it easier? I mean, you had learned and lived differently, it sounds like, between the first and the second time. And then what you just said about love, and then my mom saying, creating more love. I was like, I'd like to think that, like, say you live a life here that's super centered on love, that your hellscape would be a little bit shorter. What do you think about that?
Kind of counting on it, definitely. If I have to go back through, I've been trying. I came back with a superpower of love, and so I've been trying to live through that rather than my own. I want to say desires, because I still have plans and dreams, but my own selfishness. I try to live through my own selfishness as little as possible. And I know that I hurt people. I know that I have hurt people. I know that I continue to try to lean into the light in every choice that I make as best as I can. So the second time round, I didn't go very far. I knew this angelic being who had come to collect me was speaking in a plural instead of in a singular. So come home to us. It's time for you to come home to us. We've been waiting for you. I knew that, and from my previous NDE, that the angelic being was superpositioned. It was both unlimited and limited, and it's like a reduction for me. Super powerful, much greater than I am in terms of its power, but also reduced from infinity. And so it was speaking in this plural language: come to us, we've been waiting for you, come home, come home. And I started to go, and I turned and looked. I decided to go check it out and see if everybody was ready for me to leave. And so I went back inside myself. It was like going into a cave and looking around, and I saw that they weren't ready for me to leave. And so I went back out and I said, if it's all the same to you, I think I'm going to stay for a while, and turned around and went back in. And the result of the in-between, from 1980 to 2015, I had absolutely no confusion. I had no fear, but I knew I was going back to bliss. And so whatever infractions I had incurred or karma I had created for myself, And I love to quote Charles Dickens, "These are the chains I forged in life," from A Christmas Carol. Whatever change I had forged in life would be vaporized by the laser beam of God's disintegrator. And that doesn't give me carte blanche to live a cruel life. It gives me carte blanche to live as loving life as I possibly can. So if I have to go back through that, as I mentioned a minute ago, if I have to go back through that, it's fine. I don't mind at all.
It's just interesting. Like, I believe, if you did a horrible things, that I would think your purgatory would be horrible, like that's part of that review. And then you can go to the light. Like, I don't think you're stuck there forever and ever. But I in my thought structure, I'm like, okay, you're a terrible person. You're going to have to feel those terrible things, and you're going to have to feel them intimately. We're humans. We aren't perfect, but I don't know. I think that's something that I have a question about.
Kind of common question. It's the Hitler question, taken to the extreme. And it is so, when I went through self-judgment, I self-judged. I didn't go through judgment. I self-judged. I experienced all the pain I had given away in my life from the point of view of the person I was giving it to, as I explain in the book. But the judgment I underwent was only in comparison to the unlimited light of love, which was incomprehensibly large. There was so much of it that I couldn't not turn toward it. And I also saw this radical equality of all humanity, that the comparison was there. Everybody's comparison is the same as mine, from limited to unlimited. And therefore we are singular in our unlimitedness. We are exactly the same. So if you're on top of Mount Everest and you look right down into the valley, if you could do that, and you're looking, the pebble looks like the boulder from where you're standing. You can't tell the size of anything. It's all kind of equal. And that's the way it looked to me. There was this radical equality of the universality of brokenness of all humanity, and more than humanity, but humanity included, and the unlimited nature of the divine. So I came back with, and I'm gonna finish this up in a moment by talking about other friends of mine who've also went through hell. I learned that to compare myself to others in this life is a fool's errand, because I am, using DNA as an example, I have 99% of my DNA is exactly like yours. 99%. We share 99% with every single human being, every one of us. That's 1% difference. That 1% difference is negligible. What we are is the same. And so in that same way, when I came back, I came back with this capacity for seeing the light inside of everyone, no matter who they are. And I worked with the Maine Domestic Violence Homicide Review Panel. I was a gubernatorial appointee on this panel, working with the Attorney General's office and the state police and domestic violence people, reviewing homicides, like photos and details. And even in these perpetrators, who I really was glad that they were in prison, that even inside of them, there's still this thing that I could see of equality to me. And this equality to me is this 1% that is the light itself. And so I may stand against bullies and be on the side of the domestic violence victims, and I want justice, but that's a whole different thing than damning someone to hell for the actions that they've taken. And what I learned on the other side is that because I saw eternal destiny, that's not up to me. I only know that for me, the only one I got to judge was me, and I wasn't judged at all. So I'm all for justice, especially with violent crime in particular. But I leave the other side to the infinite, because one of the problems that I discovered when I was going through all of the pain that I'd caused other people is that the pain that I gave to them with my thoughts and my words or my actions accrued to me. It was my karma. Every wound I gave to someone else became mine. And so I try to help people understand that it's not up to you what happens to someone else. It's up to them. And my friends who've been through hell, I've got 2 or 3 friends. Howard Storm, I should call them acquaintances, they're not friends. Howard Storm is one of them. He's famously a person who went through hell. All of us who went through hell, who turned to the light, discovered the brevity of our hellscape. And those who didn't, and I bet a few who didn't turn to the light, didn't seem to be there long enough to make that choice. And they came back, and they lived lives that have been transformed because of their experience. And all of them live for the love and light, whether they saw it in person or not. Humanity has a long history of inhumanity, of inhuman action. That's what we do. I'd rather try to emphasize what Lincoln called the higher angels, the higher angels of ourselves for everybody. Again, I'm glad all those perpetrators are in jail. And we just had a major event here in Maine a week ago, touched my town. I would have wanted justice from him too. But as for his eternal nature, not up to me.
Noelle, you seem to be in agreement with so much of what Peter has been saying. Do you want to share what you're thinking, your thoughts, anything?
I think that just what Peter's saying resonates with my own knowing, what I feel inside to be the truth of experience. And when you're talking about, wanting justice, because in our human experience, we want people to be safe and to feel safe. And if there are people that are not able to be safe in society, then that seems to be a better place. I haven't had a near-death experience, but I still believe that it is only love when we leave, even if we're processing our own hell, our own experiences of causing hurt, and that hurt that we may have caused wasn't necessarily our intention. It was how it was received, but it sounded like you still experienced it anyway, just to have it and maybe an idea of how you interacted with people on the earth side of things. But anyway, I was just in agreement, and I just really enjoyed what you were saying. So thank you.
You're welcome. Most of the wounds that I caused, I totally intended. Those are the ones that were the biggies. When I was a kid and I wanted to hurt my sister, for whatever she did to me, perceived or real. There's so many different kinds of near-death experiences. I think that some of it reflects the compassion. All of it reflects the compassion of the divine to give us the experience that we need to understand what we need to understand. The suffering that I went through, that I had carried with me, was an impediment to my entry. And so I needed to have my chains vaporized for me to stop clinging to myself. And it was this act of mercy to show me myself. I saw all of the dark corners that I had hidden, not only from other people, but from myself. I, did things, and everybody does something you don't ever want to see again. Oh my God, I did that. I never want to think about that again. I saw all of that. And none of it had any weight compared to the unlimited love that overpoweringly approached me in such a way that I couldn't refuse. Didn't want to, but couldn't if I wanted to. Maybe I could have refused. I don't know. It was a 1,000-foot tidal wave of light and love, and I was a little tiny shell on the beach. It was going to pound me and take me and sweep me away, which is what it did. But it pounded me a little bit, and then it swept me away into this glorious Caribbean ocean of the perfect water with the right light.
Well, I hope that brings a lot of clarity and comfort to people, because I do think, like Jenna was saying, that passing through of hell, I know in the last podcast you said you wish that you could actually have changed the verbiage you used around that.
Mm-hmm.
But could be
True.
Scary and a little bit intimidating and bring fear around death. But the reality is it's what you focus on, your perception. It's like, okay, wait, but there's so much love. Like that's, like you said, a pebble compared to the ocean of the love that you ultimately are washed away with. And I I still contend that who you are plays into that experience as when you go.
Well, actually, when you were talking about all of that, I don't know how you book club people feel, but I was really thinking about Love's 6 Actions, from Love Ignites Peace, Our Next Evolution. And, again, this idea that we're all here to have experiences, and what are we learning from those experiences? Anyway, those were just some thoughts that were going through my head. But we started this podcast talking about near-death experience characteristics, and you've had 2 near-death experiences. Of those 15 characteristics, it sounds like you've experienced actually quite a few of them.
All of them.
All of them. Wow.
I have, so before I wrote my book, I didn't read anybody else's book because I didn't want to accidentally acquire anyone else's ideas. And I don't know if you're writers, when a writer reads one author for a long period, like if I read all of John Steinbeck's books all at once, I'd pick up some of his habits. And so I didn't want to pick up any of the habits of the other writers of the near-death experience genre of books. I'm kind of an outlier. There are like groups of NDEers, and there are people who went to the kind of the no-thingness place where I went to, and the unconditional love and the absorption, the communion, the union kind of place. And in my experience, we kind of experience most or all of those. And why that happened to me, I have no idea. I didn't choose that. It's just what happened. So I'm an outlier because I had them all.
I'd love to ask one more question around heaven itself. So we talk a lot about the union with God, but you did mention that in your second near-death experience, you could see your parents in the afterlife. And you used some words like paradise, bliss, wholeness, healing, wellness, joy, adoration, devotion, light, and truth. Is there anything you would add to that? Or what would you say about the actual afterlife? Or again, is that complete and total love? Is that the summary?
All of those words that I used, and in the book, I use this long string of words with a dash, not a dashes, but forward slashes between them. They're all approximations of a whole. All those things are fragments of a much larger piece. I was hesitant to use the word love. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the encapsulating word, because all of those things, adoration, bliss, understanding, knowledge, paradise, they were all part of this unconditional love. But the word love can't contain it, and I didn't want to give it some kind of limitation. And the reason why I landed on the word love is because every human experiences love, and every human who experiences love in more than one direction, 2 kids or a spouse or an uncle or somebody, or a cat or a dog, whatever kind of love you experience, it's a different kind of love. The love I have for my daughter is different than the love I have for my son. It's both beautiful love, but they're different. And if I had to define what they are, I don't know how to do that, because it's universal. Every human being either has the opportunity to love or the ability to love, one of those two. Not everybody has the opportunity to do it, but everybody has the ability to do it. It seemed like the one word and the other word would be light and love, but it's not light like photons, and it's not love like the way I fell in love with my child the moment it was born. That's as beautiful as that is. It's so much bigger than that. So I chose that word because of its universality and its vagueness, so that people, if they understood that about themselves, they might be able to see this love it's not just the love of, it's the love of existence. Existence itself exists because it is beloved. The whole thing is made out of it. So all of those things, love, trust, beauty, adoration, awe, hope, we separate them in the world. They're all separate things in the world. Trust is a little different than charity. Charity is a little different than joy. Joy is a little different than paradise, or bliss. But that's not the case on the other side. They're all mushed together. They are one thing. And so when I felt bliss, I also felt truth. When I understood knowledge, I also experienced joy. And they weren't separate feelings. Super hard to talk about. I stuffed the entire thing into the word love. And subsequently, I've added the word light to that.
Well, it's like you said, you have a tablespoon, an ocean with a tablespoon. It's no different than your tablespoon is trying to fit words in this moment that can't explain the ocean. So that totally makes sense.
Do you book club members have any additional questions for Peter? I have one more, but I'm going to turn it over to you guys first.
Well, not really so much a question pertaining to what your story up until today. But my question right now would be, do you feel, not do you think, but do you feel you will have another near-death experience to be coming back to possibly share on an even more cosmic level of that experience? I mean, you've had two. Why not another one?
I hope not. I'm hoping that the third time is the exit.
For sure. Okay.
I don't know that. I don't know. I'm just kind of, it's just a hope. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I do know that because of my interior practices, I've had other kinds of mystical experiences. Near-death experiences are a type of mystical experience. I've had other mystical experiences. Maybe I'll have another one of those. And if I have another near-death experience, then so be it. And it's possible. I have a stent. I take pretty good care of myself, but I could have another heart attack. Who knows? Mostly, I hope that I'm out of here on the third go-round. I had this one day little story. I was living on this island off the coast of Maine, where I was the minister on this island, size of Manhattan, the number of people in a single building spread out over this rural island. And there was a woman who read palms. And all right, read my palm, what the heck? And she looks at my palm and she says, your lifeline is broken in two places and it continues on. What the heck is this? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about.
Wow.
And at the time, I'd only died once. And so, I don't know. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'll only get third time's a charm. But I don't think that there's an impediment to continued growth in mystical knowledge based in near-death experience. I think that the history of contemplation shows that with a diligent interior practice, the self one can step aside enough from one's perception of self to create a cavern of receptivity. And that's been my experience. And I embarked on that journey 40 years ago because I was lost and didn't know what to do. And then I found it in all these ancient books around the world. So I'll just keep doing my best. And if I get knocked down and I get dragged back again, I do. But I made a promise to my granddaughter that I'd stick around as long as I could.
That's awesome.
I have a couple of questions taking things into a different direction. Actually, I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to keep it to two and they're related, but I'll ask them one at a time. My first question is, you describe in the book and then on the podcast that you did the oneness and community in God and the other side in heaven. But I'm also curious from that experience and that description, what then compelled you to continue to pursue Christian mysticism specifically?
I was masking. I was trying to find a way to live this thing inside of me and earn a living at the same time. And so when I got back to the University of Massachusetts the year after I died, I took a class in the comparative literature department of comparative mystics, East and West. And I ended up having this connection to this monastery that my Catholic high school had a connection to, and went on a Zazen mystical retreat with some of the monks. And after that retreat, I talked to the professor and I said, I've got this friend. She had this mystical experience. Of course, it was me and I was lying to him. Had this experience and this kind of thing happened. And she's really interested in Taoism and Hinduism, but she wants to pursue the divine. And he said, in all of these religions, there is a thread of mysticism toward unity and oneness. And it would be easier for your friend to pursue this in the cultural context in which she was raised, which was Christianity, rather than trying to understand the Hindu mind of Sanskrit. And so that was an important conversation for me. And so I've been reading East and West, and I was going to be a monk, but I decided I didn't want to be a monk. So I thought I would take a couple years and get a little education first. I applied to a bunch of schools, and none of which taught mysticism, but they had classes in the universities and the wider university. And so I went to study it, the history of contemplation. And I went to Yale Divinity School, and the dean became my private advisor, and I did an independent study for 3 years and under the dean, and she allowed me to study mysticism. I didn't intend on becoming a minister. I had decided that I would become a professor, and I was going to go for my doctorate, and I was aiming toward that. And she talked me into trying out being a minister. And the reason she said so, she said, you have a lot of compassion, Peter, and maybe you'd be good as a person working in the church because they need someone like you. And so I gave it a try and decided after 3 years that I was quitting, but then we got pregnant and I needed to keep my job. What it allowed me to do was, in my contract, I had this crazy contracts. I had to be able to practice meditation and yoga in my contract. And that was just like, yoga, this is the 1980s, yoga, what is this weird guy doing? And that allowed me to pursue my interior journey without question. And what it enabled me to do, because the mystical literature is worldwide, there is a strong stream of it in Christianity, I got to be able to use my Christianity to dive very deeply in. And so as the minister, I did all the ministerial things and did a pretty good job, I think. But I was able to read whatever I wanted to. And so I did. So I hid inside the church because I saw my incarnations when I was dead. I know I am reincarnated. It's not less like I believe. I entered a couple of my incarnations when I was in heaven. And that is a total no-no in the church. Like if there's a couple things that are like, you can't do, that's one of them. And then one of the other things you can't do is that if you encounter an angel of God, the devil can disguise himself as an angel of light. And so I was never going to talk about what happened to me. And so I lived masked in the church, and I ended up doing really well in the church. Successful. But it was never a good fit for me. And I misled my congregation every week when I led them to believe that I was a believer and I wasn't, because the divine has no gender, no religion, it's so far beyond all these human conceptions. It's so far beyond it. It's like the human conception is the grain of sand on the beach, and the divine is the ocean. It's unfathomable by the grain of sand.
I love your answer. I grew up Catholic. So like Creaster Catholic, I've talked about this in the podcast before, like my family's Catholic, but it was not like super serious, but that's the foundation of my belief system. So as I've gotten older, I feel most comforted and certain, I guess, within a Christian worldview. But the older I get, the more I read, the more I know, the more I experience. I don't want to say I dismantle that. It's just more that like I have this feeling that it's just so much bigger than that. And it's one means of explaining something that none of us could possibly explain or understand. And there's like the unity and oneness within all of these other religions. I felt so much shame and guilt. Like, this can't be what this is about. This is not what my belief system is about. I'm curious just about your viewpoints on the idea of like confession or all of these.
You don't need any of that stuff. No, I love my shoes. No, don't touch my shoes. That I might have been stuck on the threshold. I don't know. But the purgative fire of divine love was cleansing for me. And I know that can be frightful for people, but not for me. I'll go back through it again in a wink of an eye. If that's what I have to go through, then that's what I have to go through. It's totally fine, because it's this big. compared to the infinite love. That's where I want to be. And forgiveness starts with seeing for me, forgiveness starts with recognizing my radical equality of brokenness with everybody I know. There's nobody better than me. There's nobody worse than me. Everything in the universe eats something else. And they just found the largest black hole ever. Like, it's some number of seconds after the Big Bang, and there's this black hole that's like consuming whole galaxies. Everything consumes something else. Microbes consume human beings. It's just the way it is, that everybody's broken because I see this, but I also see all the light inside people, so I see that equality too. And that's the dominant equality I see. And that makes it easier to forgive. And there's, in Christianity, forgive and forget. That's a lie. You don't forgive and forget. You forgive and you remember. Because if that person is your abuser, you want to remember that. You want to stay out of the way of that person. You don't want to get back in their line of fire. You might be able to learn to forgive that person, but you don't have to be near them. And so this forgiveness is a freedom for me. So if I'm in a circumstance where I'm in a bar and I bump into somebody and I spill his drink and it spills down his shirt and he's all full of rage, because he's always all full of rage, because he's got this thing going on inside him from his own trauma, and it's right at the surface. And I smooth it all over. I pay for his drink. I get his dry cleaning. I calm him all down. But he's dumped all this trauma on me. I can leave that place with all of that still in me. Or I can retreat inside myself to this temple that I've created in me with my own breath and my own mind, and become free of the burden of carrying his pain. And so in my forgiveness, I free myself from carrying the pain that they gave me. So sometimes I was talking to someone the other day and she's like, I'm so angry at this person for this reason, and I haven't seen them in 10 years. And I said, do you think this other person is angry at you? Do you think this person's thinking about you? This person doesn't even remember that thing. And yet this anger that you're carrying is burdening your life and darkening your own existence. And so forgiveness isn't just for the other person. Oh, I forgive you, now we're good. Forgiveness is freedom for yourself, not to have to carry this other person's karma, this other person's guilt or trauma. It takes work. And I've definitely been in circumstances where it's been hard to forgive people. This doesn't make me inhuman. I still have to work things through. But this space that came back with me, I know that all I have to do is retreat there. All I have to do is look someone in the eye and see the light inside them and see their brokenness, and pretty much we're good. That doesn't mean I want to get back in your car again, or be in your life, or bump into you on the street, or whatever it is. But forgiveness is really about my freedom, not so much about theirs. If I don't carry their trauma, then my behavior in the world it's a practice of clarifying myself and allowing my own trauma. Then if I'm not carrying other people's trauma, I can look at my own trauma and I can begin to clear my own trauma away, because it's not overburdened by all this other layers of tar. But I can be hurt. I definitely have been hurt by people and have had to work this through. It's not just magic. I hope that helps, Jenna.
Noelle, do you have any more questions?
I think you just kind of answered mine, because I was curious how often you're able to kind of put yourself back into that divine love, into that space of feeling that divine love that helps you heal some of those hurts that you've had in your life. But you just talked about it. So I was really just curious, just that piece of, whoops, I'm noticing myself reacting. And are you able to move quickly into that divine love?
Yes, because when I first came back, I was all alone. I didn't know anybody who had this experience. I didn't even have a name for it. I was afraid I was going to lose it. This thing I was afraid my door was going to close and I was going to live in this terrible exile. And so I wanted to have the door open so that at least I could look back. It's like when I was a kid, I had to have the door open 6 inches and the hall light on. I had to be able to have that. in order to survive here. And so I began this combination practice of centering prayer and Kriya Yoga, and I practiced creating that space for myself. And in the process of creating that space inside myself, it allows me to enter in there whenever I need to. And if I have oh, that guy was a jerk to me, that guy was a jerk to me, that guy was a jerk to me, running in my head, I can go back into the space again and bring up my own prayer. I use the Jesus prayer, I bring up the Jesus prayer, bring up my breath, enter into my own temple, and then my thought about this guy goes away because I've broken the thought cycle. And because I've cultivated this physicality of peace, it's not an imaginary peace for me, it is me. And I go back into me again, and I find, oh, here's my oasis. Oh, okay. I'm safe. All's well. It's good. And then I can, when I face the person in front of me who might still be in a rage, I don't have to respond to that because it's not about my emotions anymore. It's about this higher place. I know that my body is inhabited by my soul, and my soul, as long as I think with my soul, and when I say think, I mean feel, I go back into the place of myself, then my reaction to the world can be calmer and more measured and more thoughtful, which is not to say that I haven't reacted. The day that my delightful and much loved twin nephews had my daughter on the whirligig at the playground and made it go so fast that she flew off and skunned her knees, I still picked them up by their shirts and said, "What were you doing to my daughter?" And then I caught myself and I felt all apologetic. So I still have a human response. That was a long time ago. And in the meanwhile, I've continued to develop the space, and I've learned the wisdom of taking a breath before reacting. And that breath is what brings me into myself. And if I come back into my safe space, into my own peace, then my reactivity I don't have reactivity. I have reason, and I have calmness. So then, because I don't react to them, their day changes.
Ever since I experienced reading about the love that you talked about, I can capture that too. When I notice myself in something, I can pull myself back because the feeling was so real for me. For anybody that reads your book, to capture that feeling and remember in those moments when, I'll use the word triggered because that seems to be a word that's famous or popular right now, but when you feel that, you can come back into the feeling that's captured so well in your writing.
Thank you.
What's interesting to me, we always circle back to this, but this is exactly what we're trying to help people embody with loving-based peace.
Exactly. All of these things.
Like, how can we help you transcend these limitations so that you can live as love in every possible way? How can you be that light and be that love? And again, we know that it's still a pebble compared to the ocean of the infinite. But if enough of us are living as those pebbles of love, maybe we can make a whole beach of love.
And of course, we are trying to create the message so that people don't have to die to be able to experience.
Well, you don't need a near-death experience.
It is interesting. I know for the book club listeners, we really didn't talk about the book. This really ended up being just a question and answer with Peter, which means read the book. And I'm going to ask you, Peter, you have said it's optioned for a movie. Do you have any information on that?
Yes. Next, I've been taking a week a month to write. It's the act 2 of a 3-act play. And my contract with the movie company, with the producers, is that I had to produce material that would be act 1 and act 3, and which is going in my next book, which they optioned last year. So in October, now I have 2 books optioned, and they're talking about a sequel. So this week coming, I'm going to write the final chapter that I owe them, number 5. And I should be done with that by the first of the year. And then next year, they're off and running to make the movie, attaching a director, attaching a hot young thing to play me, is what they told me. Somebody with hair.
Who's your dream to play you?
I don't.
Yeah, who do you want to play you?
I don't know. I don't want to have a preconception of what because I have no power in this. Once I hand this last chapter in, they're totally in charge. And one of the producers is a near-death experiencer, and she heard me on an interview and contacted me the next day. We talked for an entire year. Her experience was very similar to mine. And then one day she said to me, "Who's making your movie?" I was like, "I don't know, you?" And she's like, "Yeah, me and my ex." And so it's going great, actually. And I hope next year to have my new literary agent get a good enough deal with my publisher so I can take a block of time to write this third book. And while I'm writing this third book, the movie will be in pre-production, and maybe they'll kind of line up for distribution around the same time. We don't know how that's going to work out, but the movie's going great. They've optioned the next book for a potential sequel. They're talking about or a streaming series for 1 to 3 seasons. So it's like, and then I realized, gosh, I was an English major. I went into ministry. What was I thinking? I should have gone to Hollywood.
Can you, for the listeners, tell us the name of your first book and your second book again, and then maybe just a little sneak on what you're going to write in your third book?
Oh, sure. I have show and tell. So after I was a minister, I had a TV show for 15 years here in Maine, a 2-minute spot every day, just before the morning weather, reaching 80,000 people a day. And this is a 365-page collection of 240 word stories I wrote 1,700 of them that were broadcast every single day. And so it's sort of a devotional book. It's spirituality, mysticism, practicality, common experiences that end with a thought for the day. And now it's time for Reverend Peter Panagore with Daily Devotions. We'll see you at the weather after this. And so that's the first book, and that became a main bestseller. The title is 2 Minutes for God, and my beloved agent titled it. And I'm not sure I would have gone with this title now, but 2 Minutes for God, because it sounds very Christian, but it's universal. My audience included atheists and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and fundamentalists. And everybody who watched the TV station loved my show because I only had one subject, and the subject was love. Period. That's all I ever talked about in 1,000 different ways, and non-sectarian and no biblical quotes. And so then the 2 Minutes for God, quick fixes for the spirit. And this is, of course, the one that we're talking about today that's going to be made into a movie. And the next book is
Heaven is Beautiful.
Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. And the next book is going to be a background. I'm putting my fingers in front of it. So that which precedes this, and then that which goes after this. So this is going to kind of get inserted in the middle of that book. And I'm writing about mystical experiences and the results of being a near-death experiencer in my I've lived a dramatic life, especially for a minister. When I was a child, I had my first out-of-body angelic heaven journey when I was 5 years old. And then I had a whole series of them before I died, including the year before I died on the Appalachian Trail. I was out backpacking on the Appalachian Trail the March before in the winter, and had 2 experiences there. So I'm going to be talking about those experiences, and I'm going to be talking about how mystical experiences can occur in your life and how you might not understand them when they happen. And then after, the second half of the book is going to be what it's like to live with near-death experience in the context of, for me, ministry, which involved all sorts of high adventure kind of stuff. A couple things happened that I can mention, like I helped take down an escaped convict murderer with the police. This guy showed up in my office. I was held at gunpoint. There were murders and arsons and violence and all sorts of stuff that I was in the middle of because I'm not afraid to die. And I wasn't like injecting myself. It was just the way things worked out. A big, huge embezzlement. And how mysticism, I continued to have mystical experiences as I processed my integration. So it's about mysticism and modern life is really what it's about. How I lived with being an anomaly in a world where I don't fit in.
Exciting.
So
I'm looking forward to reading it.
thanks. I hope so. And these producers, the reason it's taken me 3 years to write these 5 chapters, because I wrote 2 books for them already, 90,000 words and 86,000 words, and they rejected them both. The first was because they had wanted me to interject a female character to have a romantic interest, because it'd be like a drama, romantic drama, but there wasn't anybody. And I mean, I had girlfriends and a wife, but they weren't the same person all the way through my life. So that didn't work. But what they did do to me is that they taught me how to be a better writer. So their ongoing notes and critiques over 3 years really honed my understanding of storytelling from an emotional point of view, which I didn't have before, because clergy people are essentially essayists. So I've been essentially an essayist my whole life. The stories here, I became a brief story writer in this. These are all stories, not essays. And this book here is my first attempt at emotionally driven writing. And so under their tutelage, I know that I've gotten better. And because they were hard at it. I mean, it was hard. It was difficult. But their guidance, I'm hoping that it's going to be even better. I hope it's going to be a more well-written book than this, with a deep story attached.
Well, I was going to ask you, Peter, to leave us with some parting wisdom. However, I think this has been such a collection of wisdom that we'll just leave it at that for now. So thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your time again to do a podcast with us. And it has been a delightful experience to dig into this book further and to be able to ask you even more questions about your experience and your life. So thank you so much. For December Book Club, we are going to actually be doing a review 12 months of all the books we have read in the previous year. So we look forward to tuning in with you for Book Club in December. And as always,
Get your freak on.
And I am sending you love from my heart to yours.